Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Breakfast Club episode 24, which is also the second in our three-part Oceans Week series. And I am super, super excited about this one because today we are going to be focusing on some of the most incredible technology that's actually driving ocean exploration. And we have an amazing lineup here to tell us about what's happening on that front line. So I'm going to introduce you to them briefly in the order that they'll speak, starting with Natasha Benjamin, who is Policy and Outreach Director of MARE, Marine Research and Exploration, where she works with deep sea robotic technology to collect data that informs ocean and fisheries policy. Hi, Natasha. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And then next we have Dr. Emily Darling, a conservation scientist with the Wildlife Conservation Society Marine Program, where she uses big data and field-ready technology to study how tropical reefs are changing in the face of our climate crisis and what we can do about it. Hi, Emily.
Hi, everyone.
And then next we have Dr. Kakani Katija, Principal Engineer of the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, right down the road from the Academy, kind of,
Right.
Where she works to develop underwater technologies to better observe biological and physical processes where they happen from shallow to deep sea. Hi, Kakani.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you all so much for being here. I am genuinely really excited about this and this topic. So I'll get us started pretty quickly because we want to leave a lot of room for questions. Two really quick notes before I go. First, happy Canada Day from Emily and I to our fellow Canadians, wherever you may be. And next, a reminder that you can ask questions at any time at all. If you're watching on Facebook, just leave them in comments. And if you're watching on YouTube, just drop them in the chat box. And we'll get back, or we will get to as many of them as we can at the end. So with that, I am going to drag some windows around. We're going to say goodbye to Kakani and Emily for the moment. We'll see you all in a little bit, slowly. And I'm going to give Natasha her slides. And Natasha, thank you so much for getting us started. And we will see you in a few minutes.
Great. Thank you. Well, welcome to the Exploration Technology panel. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Natasha Benjamin, and I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy during these crazy times. Thank you to the Cal Academy and Luiz Rocha for inviting me to this panel to talk about ocean technology, and I'm very excited to hear about what my other co-panelists have to say, so please stick around. My love for the ocean started a long time ago. When my dad took me snorkeling in the Florida Keys many, many years ago, I found my calling. I knew I wanted to find a way to spend as much time as possible in the ocean. And I was also motivated to do this work by seeing the demise of the coral reefs in the Florida Keys with my very own eyes. The fish got smaller. There were no more large groupers. The brain coral and the staghorn coral were gone. And this led me to pursue my career in ocean conservation and marine science. I soon realized how much of the ocean was unexplored. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about what's in our ocean. That covers 70% of our planet. My work with marine research and exploration to help document these unknown areas is critical to help us understand and manage these resources. MARE, or Marine Research and Exploration, was founded in 2003 because no one was looking below diver depth when California began its statewide process to create marine reserves. I'll get back to that in a bit. But for those of you who heard the panel on Monday about coral reefs, we heard from Luiz at the Academy about technical divers that can dive down hundreds of feet to find and collect incredible fish in the mesophotic reef. But that technology is limited for collecting large data sets to make management decisions to protect our oceans. So MARE built robotic submersibles to collect this important information below diver depth that's inaccessible to humans, bringing visibility to these deep areas so that scientists and ocean managers can make informed decisions. We have a fleet of underwater vehicles that we use to collect this data here in California. Our sweet spot is from about 100 to 600 meters deep, where most of the commercially important fish live off the coast here in California. MARE's mission is to explore, discover, and protect. In order to do this, we use deep sea technology to help solve global issues such as fisheries management and understanding climate impacts. By building and deploying these remotely operated vehicles, we can explore the ocean and go to places never before seen. This ROV, the Beagle, can go down to 1,000 meters and has a suite of cameras and sensors that collect information. The ROV is tethered to the boat with a cable, bringing it power and sending back these incredible images. There's a pilot on board driving the ROV. These scientific tools allow us to discover new species and document changes over time. We observe fish, sharks, deep sea corals, all sorts of marine critters. And this information tells a story to inform regulations. Mare turns this visual information into data by analyzing the video that we collect and identifying every fish, every coral, every habitat, and turning that into usable information. This giant black sea bass is one of many protected species that we are able to document in its natural environment. Very little is known about these deep water ecosystems, but now we have the tools and the technology to make a difference. These tools are really the future to a sustainable ocean. In order to manage and protect our oceans, you need to be able to see it to protect it. And unless we go down, we won't know what's there. Our team is currently in Southern California off the Channel Islands, and just a few days ago came across this aggregation of sheep crab. They obviously did not get the social distance memo, but every time we go down, we see something new. We collect this visual information to tell a story and to help scientists and managers make decisions about our oceans. One of these stories is about the mysteries of deep sea corals. Very little is known about these corals. They are related to the shallow water corals, the species that we heard about on Monday, but they live below where light can penetrate, meaning that all of these corals do not use photosynthesis. They feed off detritus in the water column, and all of the structures are made up of small animals. Why do we care about these corals that are deep down, that most people never even see or know about? Well, fish use these corals as habitat. They use the structure to live in and breed and use it as protection. Not only are these deep sea corals more diverse than scientists ever imagined, as you can see from these photos, they can live thousands of years. One black coral in Hawaii was determined to be over 4,000 years old. If an animal is built to last that long, to live that long, it must have some pretty unique properties, and we're finding that some organisms that live in these deep coral habitats produce chemicals that have enormous potential for use in medicines. Scientists recently discovered that 2 sponges that grow in these areas have compounds of anti-inflammatory and antiviral properties. And there's other compounds that we're finding that show potent anti-tumor activity and lots of possibilities for medicinal use. And this is just the beginning. Most of the information we know about these deep sea corals come up in fishing nets. So there's a lot more to find and find out, to learn about these unique habitats. But we can't study these deep sea corals if we don't know where they are. And Mare is using ROVs to document and map the corals. Here we first see a healthy coral garden. This is off the Channel Islands about 5 years ago. And then when we went back in 2016 after a warm water occurrence along the California coast, we saw huge die-offs of these soft corals. These corals were being taken over by other organisms and dying, and we were losing large areas where we used to see these corals, and the brittle stars were carpeting the seafloor where there were once vibrant coral gardens. So Mari was able to use the ROV to document this change and also start mapping where we see these coral gardens. Some ask, why do we care about these deep sea ecosystems? When you look at the surface of the ocean, it looks just fine. But these deep sea ecosystems are the cafeteria for the entire ocean system. For whales, seabirds, salmon, and other large fish, they feed on the fish that live in these deep sea coral habitats. Here's an example of when whales sometimes make it difficult for us to do our work. On this day in Monterey Bay, a humpback whale kept circling the boat, and we were not able to put the ROV into the water. But I'm not complaining. It was an extraordinary day. What's unique about using this robotic technology is that we're able to go back to the same exact locations over time and document that change. All of our information is geo-referenced, and we can document change over time. This footage was just taken a few days ago off San Diego. We love seeing these large schools of rockfish. These are vermilion rockfish and healthy corals. And if you look closely, you can see some purplish blobs on the seafloor. Maybe we can talk about those later if someone has an idea of what those are. In addition to documenting deep sea corals, Mari collected all of the deep water data that was used in California as the state implemented a network of marine protected areas. There are 124 individual marine reserves along the California coast that create a network system. These underwater parks serve as an investment in our ocean, with spillover into other areas to replenish. Sorry, I'm still here. Okay. And it creates a resilient ecosystem against climate change. Resilience means that we can sustain healthy populations of fish so that if there is a disturbance, these areas are more likely to rebound. With the information that Mari collected along the California coast, specifically in the Channel Islands, we were able to look at 3 species of rockfish, gophers, coppers, and vermilions, and we saw that over about a 10 to 12 year period, there was almost a 300% increase in fish populations in these marine protected areas, meaning the spillover was working, because we also saw increases outside of the protected areas. These types of studies are models for other areas that are implementing marine reserves all over the world. And the world is looking at California right now as a leader in these marine reserve efforts, including Hawaii. We've built a new vehicle, the Batfish, which should have been in Hawaii right now, but due to COVID, we had to reschedule, hopefully for later this year. This vehicle is another underwater vehicle that collects similar information as the ROV that we saw before, but is towed. It's much lighter, it's much easier to deploy, less crew, and much easier to operate, and can be used on smaller boats. And we're very excited to bring the Batfish to Hawaii. The Batfish will be collecting data in areas that have never been looked at before, and help inform Hawaii's 30 by 30 initiative to protect 30% of their coastal waters by 2030. So hopefully next time I'll have more stories from across the Pacific to share with all of you. In the meantime, we can all make a difference. The ocean is large, but as individuals, there's much we can do. We can reduce plastic use, and every day 8 million pieces of plastic end up in the ocean. We're finding plastic in the deepest parts of the ocean. As humanity, we can reduce this impact on the ocean. We can also make informed choices about what comes out of the ocean. If you eat fish, You can find out where it comes from and how it was caught. Eating locally sourced seafood that is caught without harming the environment allows fish stocks to replenish and supports sustainable fisheries. And we can also you guys can make a difference by getting involved in different ways and become an ocean hero. Share these stories with your friends. Sign up get information and support ocean exploration so that we can continue this expedition to save our oceans. And in that, I will close and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Natasha. That was fascinating. What did you call the small ROV that looked like a little airplane?
The batfish.
Oh, it's so cool.
We're pretty excited about it.
Yeah, great. So we'll also drop links to the Twitter accounts you mentioned in the comments toward the end. I wanted to ask one question from Karen, who was curious whether there's a standardized equation for what a healthy population of fish is, like how you know what's actually a healthy population.
There are. It depends on the fish, and fisheries scientists basically use data on native populations of fish and impacts on them to try to create a formula of what is sustainable and what is healthy. And that is changing, unfortunately. What we once considered a healthy population has shifted over time. We call that shifting baselines. So it's a balance of fisheries science and exploitation and trying to figure out where we can sustain fish populations.
Okay, great. And we didn't get any guesses about the purple blobs, but I'd like to know.
Preosomes. And I have a feeling Kakani will talk a little bit about those as well.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I will bring on our next speaker, Emily Darling. And Natasha, thank you so much. And we'll see you at the end for some more questions.
Great. Thank you.
Hi, Emily. Let me get your slides up. All right.
Super.
So thank you so much again for being here. And we will see you in a few minutes.
Wonderful. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you to the California Academy of Sciences for having this great panel talking about technology from the deep sea, like we just heard about. And now we're going to go a little bit shallower and go diving on some tropical coral reefs. So I am a coral reef scientist. I'm very humbled and honored to spend time in these remarkable ecosystems all over the world. That means that I spend a lot of my time doing this, at least before COVID I did. I've spent hundreds of hours underwater, breathing compressed air, feeling weightless, and studying the health of coral reefs around the world with not a lot of technology. What you can see here in this photo is a clipboard, some rubber bands, and a pencil, and underwater paper. So this is pretty low tech. But what I'd like to tell you about today is how once we get above the surface, how we're using cutting edge technology to look at the health of coral reefs around the world. And if there's one thing I would love for you to remember about from today, it's that there's still healthy coral reefs out there that look like this. And there's lots of things that we can do to help keep it that way. So when we're in the field, we spend long days underwater. As I mentioned, we're underwater breathing scuba tanks, and then we return to fuel up our generators that power dive compressors. We charge up our computers with generators and diesel fuel that we've brought into the field with us. But in short, our field work often has no electricity, no running water, and no Wi-Fi, but certainly a great view. As a researcher who works at an NGO, a non-governmental organization, or a charity, a big part of our jobs are working in partnership with local communities to manage and conserve their resources into the future. So here on Kolombongra Island in the Solomon Islands, we've been invited by local communities who want to combine their traditional knowledge with scientific approaches to look for coral reef sustainability into the future. So a lot of the ways, not only are we thinking about technology that's suited to these types of remote environments, but also how technology can connect coral reefs with the people who depend on them. And obviously that is so important because coral reef conservation is largely about people. More than 500 million people around the world rely on coral reefs. And this is in a number of different ways. This can be through biodiversity, the critical habitat that coral reefs provide for fisheries, the food security and local livelihoods around fisheries or tourism in many coastal economies, and actual economic drivers. So fishing can be an incredible source of income and a very important source of income. As well as climate resilience. When there are healthy coral reefs, waves from storms or sea level rise can break more gently onto communities as opposed to washing them away. So the importance of coral reefs is crucial. It was crucial before COVID, and it's even more crucial now during our COVID pandemic. And before I jump into our technology, I wanted to bring you a few voices from our field staff working around the world. One of the questions we get a lot is, what are the actual impacts of COVID? And so just to give you a bit of a context of that, here in Kenya, we've heard that there's no more markets for fishers to sell their fish with social distancing. And so this has led to more conflict between fishers and law enforcement. So more problems being heard. In Indonesia, in the heart of the Coral Triangle, field staff are collaborating with their partners, but using more online technologies. One of the things we're working towards is a plan to combat destructive fishing. So things like dynamite that can destroy the reef. And in Fiji, again, some bad news where people have lost their jobs, just like we've seen across North America, where I live. And people are returning to their more rural home villages in Fiji. So working in subsistence farming and fishing. So again, making sure that there's sustainable resources from coastal ecosystems like coral reefs is so crucial in this pandemic and as we move through it. And obviously that is scary when we think about the coral reef crisis. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the doom and gloom headlines from the coral reefs. And it's true, it's scary. Half of the world's coral reefs are gone, and it's estimated that 90% may be lost and degraded within the next few decades from climate change. So these are tough, but what can we do about it? Well, I wanted to again remind you that there are still healthy coral reefs out there, and there are actions that we can take, both in terms of really tackling climate change as countries and as a global partnership, and also working to make the human pressures that coral reefs face in each place more sustainable. So trying to reduce the unsustainable pressures of fishing or coastal development, have more sustainable tourism. Okay, so technology. Well, field-ready technology that scientists like myself and my colleagues can use when we're in the field diving underwater on a coral reef is so crucial to provide information on how we can protect the world's last remaining coral reefs, as well as how we can track the recovery of reefs as we put in new measures to conserve and manage them. The technology I'd like to tell you about is called MERMAID. It stands for a Marine Ecological Research Management Aid, and it's a technology that I've been developing with colleagues over the last 5 years. So it's a technology that's made for coral reef scientists by coral reef scientists. And I think that's so crucial when we think about what is going to be used immediately in the field. And I'd like to introduce you to some of this amazing group of people. MERMAID is a partnership between the Wildlife Conservation Society, the World Wildlife Fund, and our development partner, SparkGeo. And these are some of the amazing mermaids and mermen that you can see here around the world, working at all interfaces of this technology, from taking it underwater, from throwing it against the wall in remote villages, and to fixing all of the front end and back end pieces that we've broken in the field. So it's an amazing team, and thank you to everyone. So the goal of our technology is to turn data like this that you see on these underwater slates into decisions that will save coral reefs faster. So a little bit of background. Underwater, as I mentioned, These are some pictures of the very low-tech ways that we record the health of coral reefs underwater. So it's scientists being underwater and looking at how much live coral is on a reef, or how much live coral have we lost. Natasha showed some really powerful videos from California in the last talk. And that's exactly similar changes we're looking at. Were there corals there before? Are there not corals there now? That's a problem. We're also recording the health of fish populations. So we swim along underwater transect lines and have been trained to identify fish to species and give it an estimated size. And that helps us think about what is the total wet weight of fish on a reef. If there's a lot of fish on a reef, that's a good sign for a healthy reef. But here's my transition. Turning this data into decisions often takes too long. And so that's why we made Mermaid. And I'd like to show you a quick video about what Mermaid is. Thanks. So one of the ways that we're turning the surveys into actionable data is through our Mermaid Global Dashboard, which we actually just launched yesterday to the public. So we're really excited about this. What this dashboard shows is 10 countries around the world that have currently used Mermaid and put in their survey data for the surveys. And we can actually look at how healthy are coral reefs across those 1,200 sites, nearly 10,000 transects from more than 500 users who have signed up for Mermaid. So you can see that in the bottom right. This shows you a distribution of the amount of living coral cover on each of these surveys. The sites in green are reefs that we typically think to be healthy. So they're above, they have at least 30% of the reef or more are living coral cover. So that's a good sign that it is still worth working really hard to conserve and protect coral reefs, because we can still do a lot to ensure a better future for them. They're still healthy coral reefs. Whereas the red and the yellow zones, or those are sites where we saw less than that healthy threshold of coral cover. And that's where we'd really want to think about, how can we recover corals above a healthy threshold? Or are there places where societies or communities need to transform how they think about their future livelihoods, because coral reefs right now aren't in a healthy place? But this is the first time that we're able to visualize underwater monitoring data into a global dashboard. If you go to this dashboard, it's interactive. You can zoom into certain countries you're interested in, look at different sites, and we're going to be using this over time to track trajectories of coral reefs. And this is all because we were able to put field technology into the hands of people who actually use it. So to end off my talk, I just wanted to say that at WCS, I lead our global monitoring, and my job is in part to connect this technology that we've developed and need to the people who are, and partners who are actually going to use it. And so I thought I'd end off with a few examples around the world of how the work we do underwater connects with the technology and ultimately the conservation impact. So here in Fiji, many coral reefs are healthy, but under pressure from poor land use practices. So on land where there's agriculture or intensive livestock farming, that can lead to runoff of sediments or nutrients or pollution that can smother and poison corals that are just in that coastal area offshore. And so the monitoring information and working with local communities will help stakeholders design safer choices for land management plans and understand their impact onto the coral reefs, so that we can have cleaner water that makes coral reefs as well as local communities healthier. In Kenya, we're spending time underwater with Mermaid and our monitoring work to share these scientific findings with local fishermen, fish traders, and district governments in a series of fisher forums. So these forums, like you see here on the right, can help the people who make decisions decide on what new laws of co-management in Kenya are working, and look at whether corals and their fish stocks are recovering, or if they're overexploited and maybe we need new policies. One of the things we're finding is that conflict within communities can jeopardize success. And so these types of fisher forums that bring everyone together can be really important places of conflict resolution and transparency, and lead to more evidence-based conservation and better fisheries management in the future. And finally, in Indonesia, a recent national synthesis that myself and colleagues led found that some of the highest biomass, so some of the reefs that have the most wet weight of fish on them, occur in unprotected reefs in the eastern part of Indonesia. And so this type of work from our monitoring surveys can help the Indonesian government strengthen the existing management of Indonesia's network of MPAs, as well as think about looking ahead to precautionarily manage reefs that have, incredibly intact reef ecosystems, but maybe don't have the management tools in place as of yet. And finally, we can bring all of these different countries around the world together and look at what is a global conservation plan for coral reefs. So last year, myself and more than 80 colleagues looked at 2,500 reefs around the world through similar approaches like Mermaid. And we found some new things. First of all, that scientists, despite sometimes our reputation of clutching our data until we die, actually we're working together a lot, and especially younger and earlier career scientists. So more than 80 of my friends and colleagues came together to share data, and we completed the largest study across the Indian and Pacific Oceans. We found new hope that 22 countries have have approximately 450 functioning reefs, and these reefs are located in cool spots of climate change, so areas that we think have the best chance of survival going forward. And this gives us a plan for urgent actions. Particularly in these functional reefs, we need to tackle the unsustainable local impacts from fishing or agricultural runoff or coastal development. And of course, on a global scale, we need to reduce carbon emissions, and we need to vote in people who take climate change seriously. So scientists underwater are some of the best ways to take the pulse of a coral reef, and scaling up this data into actionable information and decisions through technology is crucial. Field-ready technologies like Mermaid can help us do this faster. There is still time to save coral reefs. Coral reefs are in peril, there's no doubt about that. But by linking the health of coral reefs underwater with the actions that people are taking all around the world, this is an amazing way to have a better future for coral reefs. And if you're interested in Mermaid, please check us out at the links below. And thank you so much for your time, and to Luiz and Laurel and the whole Cal Academy for the opportunity to present this work. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Emily. This is fantastic. And we got a question that I was going to ask now instead of saving for later. This is from, where did this go? Marta, who wanted to clarify whether Mermaid is a citizen science program or specifically targeted or designed for researchers and scientists.
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Marta. Right now, we've designed Mermaid to support the types of monitoring surveys that typically professional scientists would be using, whether those professional scientists are from universities, from NGOs, or from governments. That said, we're really looking into the future to tap into this amazing network of citizen scientists who also spend time on coral reefs around the world. And we'd love to work on training citizen scientists into taking down those pencils and papers and clipboards and a few transect lines and helping us collect data for Mermaid too. So please stay tuned, and that's certainly where we're going in the future.
Awesome. That's exciting to hear as someone who occasionally does that. Okay, I'm going to welcome our third speaker, Kakani. Thank you so much for waiting backstage this long. Emily, we'll see you at the end. Thank you so much. We'll move you for now. Hi, you made it. Were you bored back there, or were you like as fascinated?
No, I love seeing what everyone is up to, and it's pretty incredible what we've been able to see so far.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited for yours. And for your presentation, we're going to go ahead and connect your slides now. If you'd like to go ahead and
Sure.
go share screen, and then application window.
All right.
And viewers, this is because Kakani will not be able to see herself while she's presenting. Their screens are about to take over.
Fine with me. Let's see. I appear to have closed my slides, and then.
This is like still one of our smoothest transitions, so don't worry.
Oh, really? All right, so let's see. I will share.
Oh, okay, and I'm suddenly alone. Okay, so we're gonna wait for Kakani to reconnect, and in the meantime, I think I will bring on our other two panelists and just ask. Actually, Natasha, I'm going to bring you back on because we had one question that was specific to your presentation, which was someone who was really, really surprised about the kind of color that was shown by deep sea corals and is just wondering why that would be useful in the dark. Is that something you can speak to?
There's a lot of color underwater, but you don't really see, even in shallow water corals, but you don't see it because of the physics of the ocean. So we are using very bright lights on the ROVs that illuminate and bring out those colors. I don't know exactly the purpose of those, but we do know that there are many organisms in the deep sea that have some pretty remarkable colors. Hey, you're back.
Nothing like being in a technology session and having difficulty with technology, but for some reason my computer just restarted.
Oh, that's good timing. Thank you, Natasha, for pitch hitting. I never know which it is, and we'll see you again in a moment.
Yeah, let's see. It seems like I might have to force quit Keynote. And try again.
And while we're doing that, I'll just remind folks, no matter what platform you're watching on, we've gotten some really good questions so far, but please keep them coming. Just leave them in the comments section of Facebook or the chat box on YouTube. And we're going to loop back and ask everybody everything that comes through at the end. And I do see your slides here. So okay. I will go ahead and throw them up now. And yeah, thank you so much. I'll talk to you in a few minutes.
Okay, well, thank you. And, thank you so much for the opportunity to share some of the work that we've been doing at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, or MBARI. I'm a principal engineer there, and I lead the Bioinspiration Lab. And really what we focus on is the development of technologies that enable us to observe animals, particularly in the ocean's midwaters, a little bit better. And the title, at least what I'm working with, is Searching for Bioinspiration in the Ocean's Midwaters. My background is actually in bioengineering, and part of the reason why we're interested in developing these tools is studying animals that are doing really incredible, novel things in their environment in the deep sea, to see if there are some mechanisms that we could perhaps recreate and reverse engineer and apply it to other technologies. And so that is where bioinspiration comes into play. And I mentioned the ocean's midwaters, and, thank you, Natasha, for earlier talking about, really the difficulty and the challenges of discovering or accessing, parts of the ocean. And what I like here, what I want to share is a quick animation that really, I think, does a good job of at least bounding the problem. And so what you see on the right is the research vessel that we operate at MBARI, the Rachel Carson. And right next to it is the Statue of Liberty. And this was a wonderful graphic that was made by Alex Winchell. He and I have been working on a project together at National Geographic Society. And when we think about the ocean, the upper ocean waters, which is essentially the depth that light penetrates in the ocean, that's roughly 200 meters deep. And that's equivalent to stacking two Statues of Liberties on top of each other. But when I'm talking about the ocean's midwaters, this region of the ocean extends from below those surface waters and down to just above 50 meters above the seafloor. And this region, or at least this animation that you see here, represents the average depth of the ocean, which is approximately 4,000 meters. And so in this average environment, you notice that the midwater completely dwarfs the other regions that are found in the ocean. And interestingly, the ocean's midwaters are considered one of the largest habitable ecosystems on our planet that we really haven't explored very much of. A lot of research, particularly in the marine sciences, have focused on near surface waters, obviously because it's a bit easier for us to access, but then also work on the sea floor. And part of that is because the sea floor provides a reference. Whereas being in the midwaters, it's a fully three-dimensional environment where you have literally no reference above or below you. And so this is part of the reason why we do the work that we do, is trying to extend access to the deep sea, particularly in the ocean's midwaters. And my group, the Bioinspiration Lab, has tried to, at least address some of these challenges and technology using a wide range of different types of vehicles, anywhere from remotely operated vehicles that you see on the left, to hybrid autonomously operated vehicles. So those are vehicles that are both remotely operated, but also autonomously operated, to finally AUVs, and trying to develop smarter algorithms that will enable targeted sampling, but also persistent presence, right, for us to be able to observe what's going on in the ocean. And given that we have a really short period of time, I'm going to very, very briefly go over the ways in which we've been able to do this so far. So on the left, starting with the remotely operated vehicles, we've been developing primarily imaging instrumentation that goes on our remotely operated vehicles to really reveal animals and that environment in a completely different way. And this is thanks to a lot of different partners, particularly funders, like the David and Lucille Packer Foundation and the Gordon Betty Moore Foundation, that enables us to do this work. The second project that we've been heavily involved in is the Mesobot, and I'll let you know a little more detail about that. But it is a new class of underwater vehicles that are hybridly operated, that is optimized for working in the ocean's midwaters. And this is an effort that has been led by Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, but MBARI, and particularly my lab, has been contributing to both the imaging as well as the vehicle control algorithms with Stanford. And then finally, trying to generate or create smarter algorithms requires very useful data. And in particularly, if we're focused on using imaging as a sensory modality, what we need is data that can then be used to train advanced machine learning algorithms to perhaps automate processes that are important for expanding our reach. And so to start, very briefly, want to show you what we've been able to achieve with both the Deep PIV instrument and IRIS. So on the left is Deep PIV, where PIV stands for particle image velocimetry. And on the right is IRIS, a remote imaging system. And these both, so I should say the Deep PIV instrument is a laser-based illumination system that generates a sheet of light that illuminates whatever is in front of our camera. And this is a system that we've now integrated on all three of MBARI's ROV assets. We've also integrated the system onto Schmidt Ocean Institute's ROV Sebastian. And if all goes well, COVID may put a wrench in some of these things and plans. We may be deploying the instrument with them during a cruise in the South Pacific at the end of this year. But what's really fascinating or interesting about this instrumentation is that what you see, below that, there's a video, a black and white video. And what that is an animal called a giant larvation. It's a gelatinous animal, and it secretes mucus, and it lives inside of this mucus. And in order to pump water through their house and then filter particles and food from the water around the animal. And so what you're seeing using this instrument, the fluid motion of water as it goes inside and through that mucus structure. And this was taken, with an animal that was roughly 200 or 300 meters deep in the ocean's midwaters. And so this is an example of some of the data that we'd actually published in 2017. So IRIS, though, on the right, takes a slightly different approach. You can imagine DPIV, because we're only using laser illumination, provides only information inside of a sheet of light. So it's effectively a two-dimensional system for measurement. Whereas on the right, what IRIS is it's a planoptic imaging system. In other words, or a light field imaging system, which can then reconstruct volume data like the video that you see on the right. And so what that is, that's actually a jellyfish, Solmissus, that is swimming, I think in this case, roughly 400 meters deep. And you'll notice the colors, not only of the animal, but also particles that are around the animal. Those colors indicate depth, or the relative distance between the animal or the particle and the camera's sensor. And so we're using this data to not only reconstruct fluid motion around animals, but the goal of reconstructing the entire animal surface over time so that it can be used for modeling or computational fluid dynamics applications. But really what we're hoping to do is get to the point where we can create a digital voucher of various animals we come across in the ocean's midwaters, so that we can then do a better job of understanding how these animals function and live in this challenging environment like the midwater. And then finally, we've also used that deep PIV instrument in a novel way, where not only do we hold position stationary relative to an animal or target of interest, we've also been using this laser-based illumination in a scanning mode that can then recreate a stack of images, much like CT or MRI scans, and reconstruct what these models, these animals look like. And so as part of a collaboration with the Digital Life Project, we've taken these 3D reconstructions and then animated them to see what is going on inside and through this mucus house structure that can be up to 1 meter across from the animals that we find in Monterey Bay. And it's just incredible at the complexity that you see with this mucus structure. They're created by cells that line the animal's head, and it secretes this mucus that forms a small rudiment, approximately 1 millimeter or 2 millimeters in size, and then expands it by just using the motion of its tail. So it's incredible that animals are able to do this in midwater. It's equally crazy that we're able to get these kinds of observations and visualizations in situ, right, in a really non-invasive way. So next, I want to share with you the Mesobot. And as I said, this is a new class of underwater vehicles that we've been developing with a number of different collaborators, both at Hui, Stanford, and University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, to tackle some of the biggest problems and challenges for observing processes in midwater. And to do that, so this is just an example of some of the different applications for the vehicle. I should say the one that I am most personally interested in is the one a bit to the right, where you can see the vehicle appears to be moving up and down following animals. And I think that's really important, being able to observe animals for longer periods of time, because there's a lot that we don't know about their behavior, but more importantly, related to this bioinspiration question, knowing what animals do in their environment gives us contextual information or ecological information about what these animals are actually doing and are optimized for. So what we've done so far, this is a 3-year-long project. We've nearly done with the the vehicle development. And what you see is the Mesobot is currently in the Mbari test tank. And in that test tank facility, you'll notice that the vehicle is tracking this object that is moving around in the tank. And this has been an incredible, collaboration. And last year was the first year we deployed the vehicle during, essentially development cruises to ensure and refine the operation of the system. And unfortunately, COVID put a lot of let's say challenges for us this year. So we have not been able to redeploy the vehicle, but we're hoping maybe at the end of this year, but definitely next year, we'll be able to do that. And so, as I said, the final thing that we've been working on is smarter algorithms. And this has been really, really important, not just for, my applications of trying to understand and access organisms and systems within the ocean's midwaters, but more broadly. For example, with the Mesobot, one of the biggest challenges we faced is the fact that it is indeed a hybrid vehicle. It requires a human to be in the loop to initiate tracking on an object. And then once we start tracking that object, we actually sever our remote connection, like physically sever the fiber optic cable. And then that vehicle continues on its way autonomously. And so what if we could fully automate that entire process? Essentially pre-program a vehicle that is searching for an animal of interest. You throw it over the side of the boat and have it go find it. And so in order to do this, though, and given we've spent many years now trying to, evaluate some of the options that are out there, but we're finding that machine learning really has the promise to be successful. And so in 2018, we actually started this effort, and it was launched by this Big Ocean Big Data workshop we held at MBARI in 2018. And then partnering with C-Vision AI as well as MIT Media Lab, what we've been doing is developing FathomNet. And FathomNet is an image training set for the ocean that we've started using MBARI's curated database. But the goal is by the end of this year, having a platform available for everyone to be able to use to not only, download and use the data to train machine learning algorithms, but to also contribute data so that we can develop better and better machine learning models to automate the detection and classification of objects in video. And so something like FathomNet could be directly applicable to, what Natasha showed us with all of their work on benthic observations using their vehicles. And this is also possibly true with, what we also learned with the coral reefs, the fact that if we have these kinds of capabilities, these algorithms that can enable the automated detection and classification of these objects underwater, we can then, be able to sample large locations. So for more details, please check out our website at mbari.org/FathomNet. And please, reach out to me. And we've already been integrating this data, this novel data set from FathomNet, into our vehicle control algorithms. Because as we've been developing these algorithms for vehicle tracking for Mesobot, we've realized that there are certain conditions whereby our tracking algorithms fail. And this is particularly true when an animal of interest starts to move and then gets occluded or intersected by another animal. And what we've been able to show, and this is what you'll see on the video in the right, what we're doing right now is we're actually tracking that giant larvation as it's left its house. And then you'll notice that in a little, I think right about now, that larvation is going to intersect or at least run into this siphonophore. But because we've got this capability of layering the machine learning algorithms to identify and classify the target of interest, but also continue tracking that target of interest, we can more robustly track animals in midwater. And so we're also proving that these algorithms can be used to automate the detection, but also the tracking phases of our missions. And we're hoping that this full demonstration will be completed in August and eventually get us to that point of, a fully autonomous vehicles being sent out to look for animals that, researchers may be interested in studying. And so with that, what we're hoping is that, with FathomNet or with these algorithms that we're developing, we can do these long distance, long duration observations, transects either in midwater or on the benthos that enable, the automated detection and classification of targets, automate the counts of these targets in underwater imagery, and really, really speed up our capability to go from observation to data to counts. And, essentially what Emily was sharing with us, really impact and affect action. And so with that, this is just a sample of some of the projects we've been working on. A huge, huge thanks to not only the core members of our lab, but also the engineers that I am very, very fortunate to be able to work with at MBARI, and also all of our partners, both at MBARI and elsewhere, who have contributed immensely to this work. So thank you so much for the time.
Thank you. That was mind-blowingly cool, and we have a lot of questions about the specifics of that. I'll ask Katerina she's got a lot of good questions actually, but I'm going to ask her first one, which was she was curious what language programs the algorithms that you talked about were being created with.
Which language algorithms? So we've a lot of our machine learning algorithms have been trained using TensorFlow. But when we're running the algorithms on the vehicle, we're using either Python or C++. And yeah, there's a number of different code sets or code bases that we're using.
Okay, cool. I'm going to ask you one more as I bring the other panelists back on. This one's from Colin, and he basically was curious if you could explain a bit more what a digital voucher of a deep sea creature, what that means.
Right, and so that's actually a relatively new-ish concept, right? The idea that when we're trying to discover new life in any location, the challenges that are, in place to do that, you need to have, at least currently, you need to collect a specimen. You need to have lots of images that help describe it. You also need DNA information, right? Especially now in this new day and age. And so one of the things that we're trying to address is the fact that, to go from an animal that's been collected to an animal that winds up in a collection somewhere, there's a big change between what that animal looks like in its natural environment versus what it might look like in a jar. And this is especially the case for gelatinous animals, right? If you've ever seen a pickled jellyfish, trust me, it doesn't look anything like it used to. And so what we're hoping is that by combining imaging, three-dimensional imaging to get, multiple views of the animal, not only in, any interior portions of structures, but also exterior ones. If we can couple those models with, DNA that's been collected from the animals, we're hoping to be able to more non-invasively discover life particularly in the deep sea. So that this is still like an idea or concept we're all trying to think more and more about. But I'm just excited that these imaging tools are really enabling us to potentially get there.
Yeah. Mucus structures have never looked so beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got a bunch of really, really good questions, and I will just ask them, and then kind of anyone who is interested in speaking to them, just please jump in. We got several versions of this one from Jonah. How can someone gain the right experience to be hired as an ROV pilot?
Where do we start?
Yeah. Let me know, because it does sound pretty cool.
Most of our ROV pilots have an engineering background. Some of them have a marine science background, and it's a lot of hours of practice of just getting that experience of what it's like to look at a monitor and drive something that's hundreds to thousands of feet below the surface. But I think you can come at it in different ways. I mean, MBARI also has a lot of ROV pilots.
Yeah, I can add a little bit to that. It's funny, actually. There's most of our ROV pilots in MBARI are all pretty heavy gamers, as you can imagine, our ROV pilots don't necessarily have to have engineering degrees. We've got at least one in particular who's an electrician. But you essentially need to have, really hands-on understanding of, mechanical systems, electronics, obviously computing and code, because these pilots have to, once there's an issue, they have to resolve it and fix it right away. So having those capabilities is going to be really important.
Cool. Okay, great. And this one's from Jaden, and it came in when Emily was speaking, but probably applies to all of you. They were curious whether it's difficult to convince different governments or big organizations to actually use new technology when you develop it, whether there's a formal process for it or whether it's a matter of just really convincing people. Emily, can you hear me? Oh, okay. Shoot, I thought she was thinking really hard.
I mean, I can at least help speak to that until Emily's
That'd be
back.
great. Sure.
I think one of the biggest challenges for anyone who's developing new technology is, getting buy-in from a community. It's one thing for us to be able to demonstrate that something works, but it's another thing for that system to be accepted by the research community, to be implemented by the research community, but then also have that data then be used by various groups of people to impact something like lawmaking and decision making. And so I think that's one of the reasons why Emily's work is so fantastic. It really speeds up that process, going from data collection to data availability to people that are managing these marine protected areas. And so, I feel like the big barrier is adoption of technology. But if you're able to kind of address that, you can speed up that process significantly.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and just to speak locally here in California, we partnered really closely with the local state agencies, which is the Department of Fish and Wildlife, to develop the protocol for the marine protected area assessments. So we were partnering with academic institutions and agencies, like you said, really having the community buy-in and throughout the whole process, from the local citizens all the way to the agencies and the managers, is really critical, whether it's here in California or in Indonesia.
Mm-hmm. Oh, great. We got you back, Emily. Hi. Can you hear me okay?
I hope so. Am I back?
You are back.
Perfect. I was just trying to demonstrate the difficult field remote conditions I often work in by randomly dropping out.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry to miss I'm sure, amazing answers of my co-presenters. But to quickly jump in on how we've tried to tackle people taking on new technology, I think it's such a crucial question, because there's lots of times where I'm presented with new technology and I'm like, no, like we've already got a lot going on. But I think it is definitely a real challenge. And I think for Mermaid, we've tried to work directly with the people who are using it and solve problems that they have right now. So one of our biggest problems was taking those underwater slates into Excel and then literally typing in each, complex Latin name into Excel, having to match it with all kinds of metadata, so like length and weight, biomass coefficients, to calculate this one number that we wanted at the end of the day. And it just took, months to get clean data. And by that point, your window for policy or impact is often gone. And so now what Mermaid does is it gives you a series of web-based forms that you can use when you're offline, just like I was demonstrating a few minutes ago. But you can type that information in, and at the bottom of the form, it gives you that one number you want. So as soon as you type your data in, it's there. And you only have to type a few keystrokes to pick up the species and select it. And so, for example, in Fiji, what our teams have been able to do is at the kava bowl that night, while they're sitting around in a circle with the community, and the community asks how our reefs doing, they're able to give them an answer and say, well, your fish biomass is, in total, it's about 750. That's a pretty good sign. We're looking for at least 500, or a different story, but it's based on the data that goes in. So I think the way that we tried to tackle new technology was find the pain points that people who are needed to use the technology are having, and then try to solve those. And of course, it took a lot of co-design and working together, brainstorming, and first of all, trying to think about, is this technology needed? Because a lot of times, if we've already got workflows and they're working well enough, a new technology isn't always going to be picked up. But so we spent a lot of time in the design phase for this one in particular.
Okay, cool. Thank you. The mention of pharmaceutical companies potentially benefiting from some of the, and I think this first came up in your talk, Natasha, but we got several questions that are basically trying to ask, so in terms of the stuff that we find when we're exploring, are there any regulations that prevent other kinds of companies from extracting what they want if they're outside of an MPA? Or I think people are basically just like, how does the ocean work? You know, like, is there a danger when you find something really new or really beneficial and that being like immediately detrimental because people will extract it?
Really good question. This is a big topic right now. In addition to corals, where deep sea mining for different minerals and elements is becoming much more of a bigger issue. And the regulations in the high seas. So the way that it works is we have state waters that go out to 3 miles that are regulated by the state. Here in California, it's the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And then from 3 to 200 is federal waters. That's it's the US's exclusive economic zone. It's federally regulated. And then beyond 200 miles is the Wild West. It's open seas, high seas. There's some international treaties that are in place in those areas, but you can imagine a map of the ocean. There's a lot of territory that is not under one nation's jurisdiction. And so we're dealing with this right now. You're extracting corals is a tricky one. There's a number of different regulations around it depending on where you're doing it. But it's this fine balance right now of trying to understand where they are, but also learning about these medicinal values that they might have. So we want to protect them because they're critical to fisheries, but we also want to find some balance where if there are some cures to cancer in these deep sea corals and sponges, that there's a mechanism in place to sustainably harvest them. So this is something that we're tackling right now.
Great. Does anyone else want to, and feel free to interrupt me if I go on and you have something else to add. Okay. So speaking of mapping the ocean, Rocha, and I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, but had this really like basic question that's just kind of profound when you actually think about it, which is how much of the ocean have we mapped so far?
Mm-hmm.
That's a tough one.
Well, I mean, I can probably speak a little bit to that. So it depends on what resolution. So at low resolution, the entire ocean has been mapped. But at higher resolutions, I can't remember what the exact resolutions, but the highest resolutions that, equivalent to the maps of the moon or the Mars, I think the most recent numbers I've seen is that we've mapped about 30% of the ocean bottom. But when we're talking about mapping, right, we're talking about mapping a single surface. But when we think about the ocean, right, it's a volume. And so when we talk about kind of exploration, how much have we actually explored the entire ocean? I think NOAA has those numbers hovering around 5%. But I would check on those numbers too.
Okay. And when you say low resolution, just to give people a sense of what that means.
Well, I mean, we're talking, I think, pixel resolution or data resolution of like 500 meters or a kilometer. I don't recall exactly, but
So you'd have sort of like a rough topography of the the floor. Is that sort of okay?
You miss the finer scale details, of course, at those resolutions.
Cool. Thank you.
I could add a little bit for coral reefs. There's a really exciting new initiative called the Allen Coral Atlas, which is specifically focusing on mapping the world's coral reefs at high resolution, which would, in this case, be 3.7 meters using, also, and the really cool thing is they're using monthly or even more frequent satellite sweeps. And so not only would you be able to map what are the main habitat types of a reef, but also ask, is that changing? So is there evidence of a big water sediment plume, maybe from illegal mining? Is there evidence of bleaching? So that stress response where vast quantities of corals turn white that you could actually see from space. And so for Mermaid, we're really excited to be working with the Atlas on connecting the Atlas high-resolution satellite sweeps to scientists that are actually in the water. And so if you see, as you're developing these algorithms for water quality or for bleaching, it's really important to have those be ground truthed or reef truthed by actually getting people with their eyes underwater on the reef to help continue to develop those algorithms. So as part of our technology there, we're working with the backends of both Mermaid and the Atlas and having those connect through their APIs. And so that data that are collected using the standardized methods in Mermaid can be directed to the Atlas to help develop their algorithms. And then as algorithms flag certain areas for bleaching or water quality issues in the Atlas, that can send an instant threat alert to Mermaid users saying, maybe this is an area to go check out or to go validate. So I think, the mapping for coral reefs is really exciting, and you can go check out the Allen Coral Atlas. And I think connecting those satellite sweeps to actual eyes on the reef is also really crucial and a part that we're excited to play with Mermaid.
That's really cool. Thank you. This next question is from Sean, and it's kind of a big question, but he's basically trying to understand how, what the funding picture looks like for exploration efforts these days. So whether it's, a mix of private funds and companies that are interested in resources and federal funding, but just what that kind of picture looks like, for modern exploration on this scale.
I can get started. Mare is an NGO, so we're a 501c3, and we have a mix of funding from state and federal agencies and private foundations and individual donors. It's heavier on the contract agency side than individual donors, but this is a huge issue, especially moving forward. This kind of work is not cheap. It costs a lot of money to deploy these instruments, to use these boats, and to run all of this technology. And then in addition, once you collect the data, then you need to synthesize it and turn it into something useful, which takes time and energy and people and machine learning and AI. So it's expensive, and this administration has made it a little bit more difficult, at least on the federal side. We've lost a lot of funding that we normally would have had access to. So I would love to hear, what others are facing, but this is a continued struggle, at least in the nonprofit world and any academic institution or research institution.
Anyone else?
Emily, you want to go first, or?
I'll follow you.
Oh, okay. Our situation, Mbari is supported by the Packard Foundation, so they're very, very generous. My research in particular is funded by a number of different sources, National Science Foundation, NOAA, the Moore Foundation. I'm sure I'm forgetting something, but both private as well as public sources of funding. But when we're talking about exploration, that's a bit different than discovery, right? And so exploration is a little bit more, I would say, of an unbounded problem that makes it more difficult to submit, research proposals to, let's say, publicly funded calls, right? Since a lot of that work is kind of hypothesis driven, less exploration driven. And so for exploration work, I've at least seen more support in the private sector for that. Also, just donors and things like that. But that's been my experience.
Yeah, and I'd say for Mermaid, Yeah, like my colleagues have been saying, definitely a struggle. At the beginning, so WCS, so I work for the Wildlife Conservation Society, which is also an NGO and a 501c3. And so our work specifically for Mermaid has been generously supported by family foundations like the MacArthur and Paul Angel Family Foundation, as well as Bloomberg Philanthropies' New Vibrant Oceans Initiative. It was really hard in the beginning because nobody wants to fund another database. And so we had a lot of work trying to frame our work that, no, we're trying to, put a big return on investment from, the millions of dollars that are being spent to survey coral reefs by university researchers, NGO global efforts, government efforts, and scale that up into something that's useful and comparable, and think about standardized methods of monitoring. But again, definitely not as sexy as my amazing colleagues' work through the deep sea has been showing you. So yeah, a lot of our work, and I think around funding, is trying to think about what's the problem we're solving and how are we framing that question. If no one wants to fund a database, well, let's think about what is a data platform that's going to, transform coral reef science and conservation look like. But it's definitely hard, and I'm sure for all of us on the call, we've got a lot of teams that we're working with. And when we try to envision what 1 year, 3 years, of 5 years looks like as part of that team, having consistent funding is really crucial.
Yeah. Okay.
I think you make a really good point that collecting data is not hugely appealing to some funders, just data collection, but the impact that data can have is really what's important. And that I hope we're getting through to all of you today, that what the information can actually make, how that can make changes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let's see here. I feel like I should do 3 more, so I'm trying to. There's a lot of good ones. So Jackie, I'm just going to read hers. I'm a college sophomore about to declare a marine biology major. What areas would you all advise focusing on if I want to be as helpful as possible to coral reef protection when I start my career? And are there certain programs or experiences or skills you'd recommend? Everybody just like, I'm tired.
No, I mean, I think, especially, we've talked, I think, a little bit, all of us, about data, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not just the collection of data that's important, but it's the synthesizing of that data, and also getting that data into the right hands. And so the only real way you can use that data and contribute to that process is really having comfort with coding. I don't want to say data science, because it's really, code, dealing with data. Mm-hmm. But I also think statistics, having a really strong statistical background when dealing with this data is hugely, hugely important. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like if you have those 2 skills, you could essentially do pretty much anything, especially in thinking about like the 21st century, what marine science or marine biology may be looking like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And, in the past, to get into marine science, you kind of followed a traditional track of marine biology and ichthyology and, and more on the biological sciences. That's how I started. And I ended up getting my master's in marine policy, which I think it takes it kind of to another level, where you're able to take the science and the policy pieces and speak those languages and try to connect them. So finding out what kind of information do we need to answer and inform policy decisions. So you need to know the science, you need to know the engineering, you need to know the data piece, and the computers, and then you got a whole nice package there.
But take your time. We didn't all learn that when we were sophomore, at least I did. Yeah, absolutely. I would add to that, having that coding foundation is so crucial. In my background, it's been R. I still need to learn Python. Everyone says learn Python, but really get grounded in those strong languages, as well as the data management side of it. So things like GitHub, reproducible code, open access stacks, so crucial. I'd also add that while I've been trained as a coral reef ecologist, working with social scientists has been so crucial to the work that I do in a conservation NGO. And so any opportunity you have to take those interdisciplinary courses to work with social scientists, I think can give you a lot of experience of how do you ask questions and learn languages that aren't just R and Python and coding, but also languages that other disciplines bring in, whether that's human geography, social science, and of course, policy and management. I was really fortunate as a postdoc. So after I finished my PhD and before I got this current job, to do a postdoc within the Smith Fellowship Program. So it's through the Society for Conservation Biology, and it's a fellowship program that explicitly tried to link science with policy and management by basically introducing scientists to the people who actually make things happen in the real world, and giving us tools like facilitation, leadership, communication, project management to try to work at that intersection. So I'd also probably add, dabbling or getting some experience in business courses can be so crucial, because I think it's, as scientists, we really do ourselves a disservice by sort of having to learn on the fly things that, MBA students just get, drilled into them for 5 years. So I think as scientists, we can definitely change the world, but we also have a lot of other skills we need to learn as well.
Okay, great. I want to ask this one just because we had like 5 different versions of the question, but people are really curious, I think, about the, there's a question about deep sea mining and deep sea drilling. So just these things that are kind of out of sight and out of mind. And they'd like to know if they are a big point of impact, or to what extent they figure in your work if you're looking at reefs or looking at conservation issues.
I'll add, because, I think a lot of focus has been, especially on deep sea mining, this idea that this is really only impacting, bottom environments. But that is absolutely not true, because what we're finding is the way, deep sea mining works is once, that material is, brought on board, the remnants or sediment or whatever that's been sloughed off of what's been collected is actually re-released into the ocean, and is actually re-released into the ocean's midwaters. And so that, I think there's a paper that's supposed to be coming out in PNAS in a couple weeks, or maybe it's very soon, but they're basically cataloging the number of different impacts, mostly detrimental, on the midwater communities because of deep sea mining. But I'll allow our other speakers to say something about kind of the benthos.
Yeah, I'd add to that and say, it's not just deep sea mining having an impact on coastal as well as, all of these ecosystems. It can also be more coastal and nearshore mining as well. So I've been working a lot in the Western Indian Ocean, and some of the most spectacular reefs I've ever visited have been in northern Mozambique, right at the border between Mozambique and Tanzania. And that also turns out to be a huge natural gas underwater area. And so there's a $20 billion LNG plant planned for this very remote area. And so, that has the potential to completely transform, that area, local livelihoods, and also really have bad impacts for the shallow coral reefs there, which we know do not like big changes in water quality or big ships. We know that noise can affect marine mammals and turtles who use coral reef areas. And we see those same types of big installations happening all over the world. Even in Australia's Great Barrier Reef, the largest coral reef that you can see from space. Coal plants in far north Queensland are in very remote areas, but they're bringing in huge ships. You have coal dust coming onto the coral reefs, all the dredging to make deep enough channels for these ships to come in and pick up the coal, can smother and kill reefs. There's a lot of talk about restoration. Like, don't worry, we'll just pick up those reefs and put them somewhere else and it'll be totally fine. Well, coral reefs don't work like that. And restoration for coral reefs is really only effective at very small scales so far. So reconciling any type of industrial development, whether it's in the deep or whether it's not, I think has the potential to affect so many ecosystems. We don't understand enough about it. And it's really scary to think about the social and ecological impacts of those types of development.
Yeah. I definitely think there's a lot we don't understand. And just to give a little picture of like what a deep sea mining and deep sea drilling installation looks like, it's like a small village down there of equipment and machinery that's making tremendous noise and disturbing this habitat that we haven't, as we've mentioned, we've only maybe looked at 5% of that seafloor. So we don't even know what's there. So before we go down to the bottom of the ocean to mine minerals, we need to understand what's there first. And that's really, really critical.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear you talk about the like scope and scale of it, because I think, like, I certainly don't know how many of those kind of operations they are, or, you know, how deep they operate, or how, you know, just, it's, I think really, it sounds, you know, just say deep sea mining or deep sea drilling, like it just sounds like such a crazy specialized kind of like futuristic thing to just imagine this thing out in the middle of nowhere, that I think we tend to think there's probably fewer of them than there really are, or that business is not as big as it is. So
it'll be below the surface and there's no one down there looking. So, you know, this is a discussion right now. This is evolving. The companies that want to do it and the agencies that are going to be managing these resources are trying to develop a system to make this happen. But when it does happen, which it will come, who is going to be watching what's going on at, you know, thousands of meters below?
Right. Right. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up with this one from Diane, because it's cool to get your thoughts on, because it's future forward, and that's like a nice way to end always. She wants to hear from each of you whether there are any huge exploration breakthroughs looming, either in your work or more generally, that you think could change everything about how we explore the sea. And you could just say what you're most excited about, you know, if you don't want to go for change everything about.
I'm happy to try to take a stab at that big question first. I think one of the biggest future-looking challenges for coral reefs is, of course, how are we going to save coral reefs in the face of climate change, in the face of so many other human pressures? We know that science and data and information is so crucial. And if we think about who's actually, you know, who's actually making decisions to save coral reefs and how can we mobilize resources, there's a big opportunity this year through the Convention on Biological Diversity. They're renegotiating their next 10-year, you know, plan that 196 countries and other parties would sign on to. And so having really strong coral reef statements that so many countries can agree to is so crucial. And I think, you know, that needs to be grounded in science and evidence. And it needs to be really clear and strong targets. So not just that we're going to save coral reefs, but if we reframe that, where, you know, all of our countries' coral reefs are on recovering trajectories, or they've maintained or are recovering coral cover. You know, that would be a really important thing for the future of the world coral reefs, because it means you're going to have no net loss of living reefs from today, say. But then, you know, as I start to unpack that as a scientist and a researcher, it gets into, okay, well, how are we going to measure that and track that over time? How are we going to, you know, have that be a technology tool that's available and available in so many different contexts, you know, for 100 countries around the world that have coral reefs, from very deep and twilight reefs to the more coastal ones. So to me, the biggest excitement about saving, you know, about the future is, how do we save coral reefs, and how do we connect the technology to the policy impact? Because if we can mobilize resources to save coral reefs at a global scale in targets that, you know, are really driving for us forward to a future we want to live in, then that's going to open up so many windows for countries, for communities, to be able to save and manage their coral reefs.
Yeah.
And I think it's an exciting time too. We're entering the decade of the ocean, starting in 2021. People are talking about the ocean, thinking about the ocean. It's coming up in the news. When we think about land conservation, you know, where land conservation was maybe 20, 30 years ago, the ocean is catching up. We're trying to hit these goals of protecting 30 by 30, which is 30% of our global ocean by 2030. And in order to do that, we need to take all of the technology that the three of us have been talking about, plus many more, and scale it. that's really the only way this is going to happen. I think it's really exciting that we were able to touch kind of from old school scuba, surveys that we've been doing for decades to kind of, more shallow ROV work to autonomous vehicles. We need all of these technologies to achieve our goals, but scaling is really the key. And that's something at MARI that we're working on. How do we take this ROV and what we've learned and scale that globally to assess marine protected areas, to look at deep sea corals? So that's our next chapter that we're really excited about. The technology is there, and MARI has been a huge leader in developing a lot of the autonomous technology, and I really think that is where we're going. The ROV allows us to get a little closer to the fish and closer to the bottom for the work that we're doing, but ultimately we're going to have to make it, autonomous vehicles and thousands of them to collect the data we need to manage the ocean.
Yeah, I mean, Natasha said it all. I mean, it's all about scaling. How do you bring exploration to scale in such a big place, and not just exploration, but repeated observations, right? Because that's what's required in order for us to be able to say something about the health or how, the ocean is changing due to a number of different impacts. I think for me, as an engineer and also, a technologist, I think there's a lot of excitement around AI. I mean, we've seen at least how it's impacted a number of different areas and fields within, the terrestrial domain. And this is part of the reason why I'm really excited about this FathomNet project. It's what the idea is. I mean, similar to COCO or ImageNet, something that is available for anyone to be able to use to train machine learning algorithms on, to then run any video and either detect or classify things that's underwater. I mean, I think that is absolutely where we need to go, because, we're talking about surveys either conducted by people, we're talking about surveys either conducted by vehicles, either remote or autonomous. But the biggest constraint for all of that resource-wise is how do you process all of that data? Mm-hmm. And so if we can automate that process, we will save so much people time in order to then reallocate that time to analyzing and understanding, what the data is actually showing us. And so, FathomNet is just one thing, right? Is the start. What we're trying to do is borrow and leverage the data that MARI has been collecting for the past 30 years as a starting point. You may or may not know this, but every ROV dive that the institution has ever done is actually annotated. All that video footage has been annotated by experts using the video annotation and reference system that's been developed at MARI. And so we've got already this expansive data set, thousands of hours of video that's on tape, right? And we're starting to digitize all of it. We're starting to localize all of those annotations with the idea that could be the backbone or the starting point, right, for the rest of the oceanographic community to contribute data to that database, and then anyone can use. So we're trying to make it open, both accessible to public, nonprofits, academic institutions, but also for-profits, because to really solve this problem and understand what's going on in the ocean, we need partners in all sectors. And so that to me, at least, is something I'm really excited about, both just in a general scale, and how it may be able to help address some of our pretty big problems that we have with ocean data collection and management.
That's so cool. And and you're also inspiring in the work. It's also amazing too that so much of this really powerful stuff is packaged in these ROVs that are undeniably really cute. It's just sort of powerful, powerful
and
science.
named after real coral reef fish, like the batfish.
Yeah. Oh, it's so cool. I really can't thank you enough for being here. And people were really inspired as well. And I will drop links to each of your Twitter accounts and your respective websites into the comments sections. So viewers, please follow these people, follow their work. And if you have more questions, feel free to keep adding them, and we'll try to get some answers for you perhaps after the fact. But to the three of you, thank you again so very much for being here. And I'll remind viewers that we have one more panel coming up in the series on Friday. We will be talking about sharks with Dr. David Schiffman, famous on Twitter as Why Sharks Matter, Vicky Vasquez from the Pacific Shark Research Center, and Jada Elcock, also kind of famous on Twitter and TikTok as Sophistication, a really cool science communicator. So come back Friday, and panelists, thank you again. And yeah, have a wonderful rest of the week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.